There is no equivalently sized handgun that offers the same amount of sight radius that a Glock pistol does. Take, for example, the Glock 17, which was the first Glock I started carrying over a year ago. It has a 4.5-inch barrel and is essentially the size of a commander length 1911. Yet, because of how the gun is designed, the slide extends further back over the grip where the hammer would normally be, and it has the same amount of sight radius as a 5-inch full-size 1911. The Glock 34 is even more pronounced. It has the same footprint of a government model 1911, yet it has the sight radius of a 6-inch long slide 1911. Ironically, the optic-ready models give you the most sight radius on a Glock because the rear sight dovetail is pushed even further back. Combine this with sights that extend toward or over the rear of the slide, and you can get some pretty crazy results. Here I have a set of LPA 1911 sights that I recut to fit a Glock 41. This gun is the same profile of a standard 1911, but it has over 8 inches of sight radius. And the same goes with this Glock 26, which was the impetus for this video. This has become my main carry gun in large part due to it having 5.7 inches of sight radius, which, despite being pretty much the same size gun, is over 35% more sight radius than the 4.2 inches of my Smith & Wesson Model 60. Of course, I've heard all of the weight and capacity arguments, but none of the arguments were as convincing to me than actually comparing the sight radius of these two pistols side by side. 0.04 of an inch misalignment between the front and rear sight on my Model 60 will result in 0.85 inches of deviation at 25 yards. 0.04 of an inch is the thickness of a sheet of paper. With the 5.7 inches of sight radius that my Glock 26 has, that same 0.04 of deviation will not only be easier to perceive, but it would only result in 0.63 inches of deviation at that same distance. And realistically, when we break a shot, our sights are typically much more misaligned than that. There's probably only a couple dozen people in the United States who can regularly shoot sub 2-inch groups at 25 yards standing straight up. That 35% increase in sight radius could absolutely be the difference between hitting and missing a target, whatever that target may be. I don't tend to think strictly in the mindset of a defensive gun usage because frankly, the only real life uses I've had with any of my firearms have been offensive use against pest and game animals. And if it's safe to assume a good offensive handgun is typically more capable than a defensive handgun, which tend to make sacrifices in capabilities for weight, comfort, and concealability, then I'm not losing any capability if I have to use this offensively configured pistol in a defensive situation. I shot the Eli Dicken drill for the first time ever recently, and it was with this gun. The shooting that Eli Dicken stopped is pretty much the perfect example of using a pistol offensively in the defense of others at a significant distance, and that's much to the chagrin of every neo-FUD that tells me I'll automatically go to jail if I have to shoot someone at a distance greater than 7 yards. This drill is shot at 40 yards. You draw from concealment and make 10 shots in 15 seconds on a man-sized target to mimic the real-life scenario. For my version of the drill, I used a full-size B8 target with the repair center flipped around. The 5-ring on a B8 is 19.5 inches, which is exactly the same width as a military E-type silhouette, and that is not a coincidence because bullseye targets have been used to teach militaries how to shoot people for as long as projectile weapons have existed. But unlike a silhouette target, a bullseye target is going to be much more difficult to hit due to how much more surface area a silhouette has for the head and lower torso. The standard for the Eli Dicken drill is supposed to be 8 out of 10 hits to mirror the actual incident. My standard on the flat range in ideal conditions, of course, is going to be much higher than that. Now, I do still carry my Model 60 depending on how I'm feeling that day. There are still advantages of a revolver, like, for example, I don't have to be as particular about my backstop if I'm putting a slow-moving wad cutter into a pest animal or if I want to keep a shot shell loaded. For a 9mm, I'm sure even the best hollow points out there would over-penetrate some of the smaller pests. If I had to choose one, I think I would end up choosing the Glock 26 in more scenarios than the Model 60, and in large part due to that greater sight radius. So I have heard Massad Ayoob retell an anecdote about one advantage that a shorter sight radius pistol may have over a longer sight radius, and normally I would totally dismiss this as a Wilson Combat Channel boomerism, but that anecdote reportedly comes from a shooter that I have a lot of respect for named Bill Allard. I've actually made a YouTube post about this individual, but to summarize, he's a 2600 Club member in bullseye pistol shooting and very accomplished in the sport. But unlike me, this man has put bodies in the ground. He was a member of the NYPD stakeout squad at the height of the 1970s crime wave. And if you've heard of Jim Cirillo or read his book, Tales from the New York City Stakeout Squad, you'll know Bill Allard was his primary partner and was always known to be a better shooter. According to this anecdote, as Massad Ayoob tells it, the one advantage Bill Allard believed a shorter sight radius had over the longer sight radius was that the sights align faster and is thus better in some kind of situation that necessitates speed over precision. But this doesn't really make sense to me, and I think it's an inaccurate use of language because When you present the pistol with a short sight radius or long sight radius or a red dot, which theoretically is like having iron sights with impossibly long sight radius, it takes the same exact amount of time. If we're going to assume that having a shorter sight radius is faster to align and longer sight radius is slower to align, then by that logic, red dots would be nearly infinitely slow, and removing the rear sight on your pistol would make it infinitely fast. I think a more accurate way to phrase what Masad Ayub is trying to say is that the sights will settle faster on a shorter sight radius gun. The fact of the matter is, the gun is never perfectly still. The sights are never truly perfectly aligned. It's what you can perceive that changes with sight radius. With the shorter sight radius, you lose some granularity in being able to see how misaligned your sights are, and thus the sights appear more stable. This is the same reason why so many people are shocked to see just how much they actually move the first time they pick up a pistol with a red dot, or especially a pistol with magnified optics. But none of this affects the actual speed or stillness at which you point the barrel on target. A shorter sight radius only gives the appearance that your sights settle or achieve stability faster. For some shooters, having their sights appear more still with a shorter sight radius could improve their confidence in pulling the trigger quickly. And if that works for you, then by all means, do as you see fit. But as a rule, having more sight radius gives the shooter more precise information on where that barrel is pointed. And unless you're the type of shooter that can get overwhelmed by that information or find that information could potentially distract you or reduce your confidence on the trigger, outside of that, it's pretty much always going to be to your benefit to have more sight radius. Now, from a practical standpoint, there is probably a point of diminishing returns when it comes to sight radius on a pistol. And for me, it's somewhere around the size of an Olympic air pistol or free pistol. This point of diminishing returns with sight radius is mainly due to the unsupported nature of most types of pistol shooting. Because we're fleshy meat sacks, we physically can't extract any more precision out of this more precise sight picture once our sight radius is past a certain point. This is part of the reason why in bullseye pistol competition, which is the most precise pistol sport out there that uses red dot sights, pretty much all of the records are still held with iron sights, even though bullseye shooters have been putting red dot sights on pistols since the mid-1970s. And this isn't just a case of there being better shooters in the past. Plenty of shooters and record holders in their prime around the time of the 70s and 80s either went through the transition from irons to red dots or tried out red dots and decided to stick with iron sights. The first time the national matches were won with a red dot was 1980, and the last time it was won with iron sights was 1995. So even though a red dot or a super long sight radius is technically a more precise representation of where the barrel is pointed, under certain shooting conditions, shooting unsupported, the real effect on target is we're typically unable to extract any more precision from that more precise sight picture. And to avoid people taking this as some kind of confrontational red dot versus irons type video, of course a more precise representation of where the barrel is pointed is not the only advantage of a red dot. And there are plenty of downsides to a dot in specific applications. There are reasons why I own several red dots, I have several pistols with red dots, and why I use them in competition very well, I might add, and there are reasons why I typically do not carry a pistol with the red dot. But that's beyond the scope of the video, and if people weren't so tribalistic about this, I wouldn't even need this disclaimer. So I'll eventually make a full video talking about this subject, maybe even with a guest speaker. It's going to be based on real experience, a level of skill that no one talking about this online possesses, and a historical perspective spanning 120 years of competitive pistol shooting data. Now, back onto the subject of Glocks and sight radius, I'd like to thank my friend and mentor Keith Sanderson for cluing me into this about a year ago. If you don't know who Keith is, he is a 5-time Olympian in 25-meter rapid fire shooting, a former world record holder in that sport. He was the 2016 national champion for bullseye pistol. In fact, this year he came in second overall at nationals in the open category. And for service pistol shooting, which is iron sights and more restricted than open match pistol shooting, he even won the illustrious National Trophy Individual Match, which is a trophy that's been awarded since 1904. Needless to say, that doesn't even scratch the surface of his accomplishments. He was a shooter for the Marine Corps team, the U.S. Army team, the Army Reserve, and he's been shooting competitively for, I believe, over 30 years. His mentorship and the mentorship of the current national champion, John Shue, have been the greatest influences on my shooting ability. And I don't think there's any greater testament to what these men have taught me more than the fact that this year at the NRA Nationals, I shared the podium with them in an open category match, but I was shooting a pistol with iron sights. If you want to hear more about what Keith Sanderson has to say about shooting and pistol marksmanship, go ahead and check out the series of awesome interviews my good friend Zane did over at the Bullseye channel. If you've watched our videos, a lot of what we say or preach even might sound very familiar because Keith is one of the best shooters in American history and has mentored both of us. And if you've been saving money by dry firing and would like to support the channel, you can have a shot at winning a 2010 Ford Raptor by heading to fanfm.com/JaredAF and purchasing an entry. If you're watching this in the future, there's probably something else cool that you can win by going to that link. A significant portion of every entry purchase goes directly to supporting this channel, and even if you don't win the grand prize, you do get a memento of your choosing. Anyways, that's all for the Why I Carry a Glock Now video. If you enjoyed this video or learned something or have a difference of opinion, let me know in the comments. Thank you to my channel members and Patreon supporters for supporting the channel directly. You can become a channel member or Patreon supporter by clicking the relevant links down below. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.